Democratic Unionist Party. There they were in Downing Street, looking happy as Larry because they've done a deal with the Conservative Party, what's called a confidence and supply deal, and for the mere bagatelle of £1 billion of taxpayers' money, Mrs May's position is now secure as Prime Minister. And more of that later in the programme. But the other really big story today, and it follows on from the European summit that I was at on Thursday and Friday of last week, is the government have today published their paper, The United Kingdom's Exit from the European Union, Safeguarding the Position of EU Citizens Living in the UK and UK nationals living in the EU. So what have they said? Well, what they've said basically is that anybody that's been living within the United Kingdom for 5 years has exactly the same rights as any British citizen. That anybody that's been living within the United Kingdom from the EU for less than 5 years, once they've been here for 5 years, will have the same rights as any UK citizen. And anybody that comes later will be allowed a grace period where they can prove themselves and equally qualify for the same rights as UK citizens. And they've done all of this, and yeah, it's technical, sure, but they've done all of this in the hope that across the European Union, the estimated 1 million, though I suspect the figure actually is rather lower, because many UK citizens living in the EU go there for 6 months in the winter or whatever it may be. But they've done this hoping that those rights will be reciprocated and that this is all part of a big nothing's agreed till it's all agreed deal with the European Union. What do I think of this deal that's been offered today? Well, I was always for, actually, us being generous, because if people have come to the country legally in the past, even if I think we've allowed too many people and we've not been selective enough, you know, they came legally, and to retrospectively change people's rights, frankly, we'd be living in a banana republic. So I've got no problem with that. I think the idea that even if, you know, a deal is difficult to come by, Brits living across the European Union will have their healthcare paid for regardless, is a very good, reassuring, sensible thing to do. I think the idea that EU criminals in this country would actually get deported and sent back is even better. So they're the good bits of the deal. It's a generous deal. It's got some sensible parts of it. The thing that worries me is there's no cut-off date. They say it could be any time from the triggering of Article 50. Well, that was on the 29th of March this year, up until we leave. And I wonder, will there ever actually be a cut-off date? Will there ever be a moment where people say, look, you can come, but there's no guarantee that you'll be allowed after 5 years to have settled status and full rights? And that is not in this deal. And whilst I can see, in terms of diplomacy, that this document may be quite good, although Donald Tusk said it was considerably below their expectations. But then again, I think what Donald Tusk wants is for us to buy everyone from the EU a house. But even so, I still think it's too generous because there is not as yet a cut-off date. So I want to ask you, do you think this deal is one that Theresa May and her government have got right? And if you think these proposals, as I perhaps do, are a little too generous, then call me on 0345 60 60 973. If you think the offers are too little too late, text me on 84850. Or perhaps you think these plans are fair and pragmatic, in which case you can tweet me on @LBC. Not forgetting to use the hashtag Farage and LBC. And of course, as ever, you can watch the show live by going to LBC's Facebook page. Now, Julia on Facebook steams in to this argument and says, I have never been so angered by a politician. How dare she tell over 3 million people from the EU that they can not only remain here, but their families can join them. This is not what I voted for, and she had no right to make that decision for me. Well, Julia, actually, you are right, because what is big, and I did say, I thought this deal diplomatically may have been clever, but actually was overly generous. But Julia is right that if you've been here for 5 years and you're fully entitled to all the same rights as a UK citizen, well, then you can bring the rest of your family here as well. And that's perfectly clear in this document. The one sticking point, Julia, is the EU say that the European Court of Justice should be able to oversee these decisions, whereas the UK government have said, no, it must be UK law, although David Davis, who was on television yesterday discussing this, said maybe there'll be a sort of separate third-party arbitration panel. I mean, the idea that UK citizens post-Brexit would live under UK law, but EU citizens living in the United Kingdom could live either under UK law or EU law, clearly would be a nonsense. So Julia, angered, not happy, thinks Theresa has given away too much already. I wonder what Joe in Maidstone thinks. Joe, good evening.
Hi, Nigel, first-time caller.
Well, welcome.
Thank you very much, sir.
Joe, what do you think? I mean, has she been too generous, or I mean, what do you think?
I think that she has been far, far too generous myself. Just to give you a bit of an idea of my background, I am born and raised in the UK. I'm 26 years old.
Yeah.
And my wife is non-European.
Yeah.
Now, the loopholes that we have to go through, and we are in a genuine relationship, we've been together for years and years, is absolutely insane. She has to pay for the NHS. I have to give all my wage slips, and it's absolutely insane. Yet you can come from Europe, and, you could be here for 5 years, and boom, you now have absolutely more rights than me. Because now European citizens can bring their families here without paying an absolute bean.
Joe, where is your wife from?
She's from Thailand.
She's from Thailand. And you are married, are you?
We are married, yeah. We got married in the UK.
Yeah. Well, Joe, you're absolutely right, because whether it's from Thailand or whether it's somebody, marriage or not, whether it's an engineer from India or a doctor from New Zealand, it's really quite tough to get into the United Kingdom, and certainly you won't qualify for benefits, but you can be anybody you like from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, and at the moment you can still come to the United Kingdom with absolute ease. Yeah. All you frankly have to do is just show your passport at Dover. So Joe, you think this is discriminatory against non-EU people?
And British people.
And British people. Go on, explain that.
Absolutely. I mean, if it was like I have less rights now than a European citizen, they can access full benefits. Mm-hmm. I can't. Even if I claim sort of housing benefit now or something, that invalidates my wife's visa.
That's a very good point.
And now you're telling me that, an EU citizen now suddenly has all these rights. I pay national insurance, I pay tax.
Yep.
I should be in charge. Not these Europeans.
So an EU citizen, Joe, doesn't just have more rights than a non-EU citizen, but in a relationship like yours, an EU citizen has more rights than a British citizen.
Absolutely, Nigel.
Joe, for a first-time caller, you have made a wonderfully powerful and concise point. Joe, I thank you very much for that call, and I invite people to call in and tell me, where's Joe got this wrong? Doesn't Joe from Maidstone actually have a right to be pretty bloomin' angry? Nigel, just what do they want? It appears they still don't understand leave means leave, and that no one should live in the UK under EU law. If they want, they could go and live in the EU, says Julia in the West Midlands. Well, Julia, I'm going to, put the other side here. David Davis, and the one thing he was very diplomatic yesterday on the television, but the one thing he was very strong on, he said the European Court of Justice would not decide. And I guess at the moment, that's the big sticking point on this particular area, namely nationals living in each other's countries. So the government have said we will not be under the ECJ. Let's hope they stick to that condition. I get on Twitter sad listening to LBC and hearing EU citizens demanding better rights than UK citizens. If you want that, move back to the EU, says Jan. Well, I'm not sure that's going to happen in a hurry. And Joe is a popular name and theme this evening because I've got another one called Joe from Lowestoft in Suffolk. Joe, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
Well, just recently I've become a dual national. I applied for Irish citizenship as soon as I realised that Brexit was coming about.
No, I'm told, Joe, there are record numbers of people doing that.
Yeah, I don't blame them. I'll always have free movement throughout Europe. I can work throughout Europe. I can live and work, visit. I don't have to go through the immigration channels when I go to Europe. It's best, but what we got to do, people like myself and other EU nationals, is hold Donald Tusk's feet to the fire to make sure he demands that we are covered by the European Court.
So, Joe, tell me, did you have any genuine reason or rights or history to apply for Irish citizenship?
Well, my parents are Irish.
OK, fine. So
I'm an Irish Catholic. I've also lived in Germany for 4 years. That time was spent in the army. So everybody's not patriotic. So that's the Coldstream Guards, No,
Joe, I wasn't accusing you of that. But what I am going to accuse you of, perhaps, or ask you about, is you're going to have an Irish passport, you're going to have a British passport. Don't you, to some extent, Joe, want to have your cake and eat it?
That's what you wanted when we had Brexit.
No, I didn't. No, not at all, Joe. I wanted us to be an independent, self-governing nation. But aren't you sort of hedging your bets a bit here?
Eat it, and it's obviously not true, Nigel. You made it out that we could have our cake and eat it.
Well, I tell you what we can do. We can, in one sense, that we can be a self-governing democratic nation, and we can trade openly with the world, Joe. I stand by that, absolutely.
Yeah, but in the meantime, in the next 10, 20 years, our economy is likely to tank.
Get out of it. It could. What if it goes through the roof? What if it goes up? Joe, let me ask you one quick question. With your Irish passport, do you think that post-Brexit, the European Court of Justice, based in Luxembourg, should be able to decide the rights of EU citizens living in the UK?
Well, it's the same as the Supreme Court in London who decides what people in Northern Ireland are doing.
Well, Northern Ireland's part of the United Kingdom. Are you arguing, Joe, with your Irish passport? I'll ask you one more time. Are you arguing with your Irish passport that's on its way that the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg should have a say on the rights of EU citizens living in the UK?
They've protected our rights.
Fine, Joe, fine. You've made your point. I get it. I thank you. Well, Joe, great believer in the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. He does want to have his cake and eat it, I think. But fair enough. He's doing what's in his own interests, I guess. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
And the Department for Communities and Local Government saying every tower tested so far, believed to be around 60, have failed the fire safety check. Alok Sharma, who's Minister of State for the Department for Communities, Local Government and Conservative MP. I've got a figure here that there are 40,000 people living in tower blocks around the country. Well, we haven't got 40,000 spare hotel bedrooms to put them all. Where are they all going to go?
What we need to make sure is that the buildings that can be made safe are made safe.
And then where do we put people? Why can't the work go on around them?
Ultimately, we want to make sure that everyone is safe, and we want to make sure that the work is done as quickly as possible to make sure this non-compliant cladding comes down.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast every weekday morning from 7, only on LBC.
With Hampton by Hilton, now open in Aberdeen.
I've always paid into my pension, but never thought about how it was performing or how much I was being charged for it. That's why I contacted the specialists at PensionWorks. They carried out a pension health check, which found hidden costs and expensive fees within my pension that could have cost me years of lost retirement income, meaning more money for my future.
Let the PensionWorks check your private pension for free before it's too late. Text YES to 83222. That's YES to 83222.
We asked people to put a price on their hearing. One reply said £100 trillion because I love music and languages. Another said, priceless. Who wouldn't want to hear their grandchildren laughing? We know how much you value your hearing. That's why at Boots we have interest-free monthly payment plans available to make the right hearing solution for you even more affordable. Boots, let's feel good. Subject to status, over 18s only. Terms and conditions apply.
Stub out your last cigarette and celebrate with a holiday in the Caribbean. London South Bank University is looking for smokers to take part in an exciting new research project in the capital. You'll be paid to take part, and along with the chance to become a non-smoker, there's a Caribbean holiday and more to be won. So hurry, search online for LSBU Stop Smoking Study. That's LSBU Stop Smoking Study. Over 18s only, T's and C's apply.
My thing, Guatemalan cortado. As coffees go, it's pretty lively. Must have smashed out 24 spreadsheets in half an hour. Boom. Which is, funnily enough, what my laptop did when I spilt my cortado all over it.
Oh, no.
So, I need a new one. 15-inch display, 1 terabyte hard drive, and no big price tag. Refurb it is.
Jake's thing. It's got to be a refurbished laptop from eBay. That's as good as new with 12-month seller warranty. Buy refurbished tech on eBay and save up to 50% versus new. eBay. Find your thing.
You have one new message. No message left.
Sound familiar? It's not the sound of silence. It's the sound of your customers not being able to get in touch. So take back control with eReceptionist. eReceptionist answers and directs all your calls, ensuring your customers always get an answer and you always get the business. Take a free 30-day trial at ereceptionist.co.uk. Free trial must be cancelled within 30 days to avoid charges.
We've been thinking about Tom.
The cat.
And how, whilst he's remembered to buy cat litter, he's forgotten his bank card. But instead of worrying about how he's going to pay for it, he's simply wondering if a dog might have been a better choice of pet. That's because at NatWest, we've already thought about the left bank card at home scenario. It's why we created Get Cash, so you can withdraw money from our cash machines with just our mobile app. NatWest, we are what we do.
Take out up to £130 a day as long as it's within your withdrawal limit. App available to customers with online banking and a UK number.
Leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag FarageOnLBC.
The Prime Minister has announced that EU citizens that have been living in the United Kingdom for more than 5 years will have settled status, which gives them full entitlement to the same rights as everybody else. Equally, she said that those that come later can earn that right too. And I'm asking you, is that simply too generous? Has she got this right or not? But the other big event in Westminster today, and in the sunshine in Downing Street, we saw the Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland. That's the party that was founded 40 years ago by the late Reverend Ian Paisley, very much considered in those days the hardliners of Ulster Unionism, with the official Ulster Unionist Party being the big party. They have now disappeared. They've gone. There are no OUP seats in Westminster, and the DUP have 10 of the 17 seats in Northern Ireland. And without them, Mrs May simply can't govern the country. So the deal has been done, and it's taken a long time. What does it all mean? What it means is that £1 billion worth of spending promises have been made to Northern Ireland over the course of the next 2 financial years. That is 100 million quid for each DUP MP. I mean, even international footballers don't get transfer fees on that level. And there'll be some, and I did tease a little bit about it earlier on Twitter, there'll be some that say, what a terrible waste of money, what's happening, why is the taxpayer paying for Mrs May's failures? Yeah, you could argue that. But there's another argument that says, actually, £1 billion to secure a solid government that still at least says it's committed to taking us through the Brexit process is actually a relatively cheap price to pay for, well, I was going to say strong and stable government, but I'm not sure I could do that and keep a straight face. But if it's £1 billion that actually keeps a government in place and we get on with the Brexit process without the career politicians doing their best to overturn the will of the people, maybe it's a cheap price to pay. At least that's my view. Now, back to this question. Has Mrs May been too generous or not? Jared in Sutton is my next caller. Jared, how do you see this deal?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I see the deal as extremely generous. And I can only make a comparison to a Commonwealth citizen. My wife is a Commonwealth citizen. I am a Commonwealth citizen.
Yes.
However, I came here in 2001 and I was 14 years old, so sort of went through the process of getting indefinite leave to remain and then the British passport. But I think it's too generous for one main reason, is that all of these services that an EU citizen will be entitled to will come just because they've been in this country for 5 years. If a Commonwealth citizen enters the country on a work permit,
yes,
or a highly skilled visa, however it may be, they've got to wait 4 to 5 years before they have any sort of entitlement to anything. And I think you're just allowing, just with the 5 years as well, as with this 5 year process, you can't claim citizenship if you have a criminal record. And now everyone is going to have it. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I have to say, Jared, that the idea of people coming here from the Commonwealth or elsewhere becoming citizens with criminal records, I don't find very attractive anyway.
No, I wasn't saying that it's only Commonwealth.
Right, okay.
A Commonwealth citizen with a criminal record. What I'm saying is that a Commonwealth citizen has to go through a very long process and also a very extensive process.
Yeah.
I think an EU citizen should go through exactly the same process. And I'm only saying that because that is what I see, you know.
No, Jared, actually, I have to tell you, I agree with you. One of the arguments I made in the many years leading up to the referendum is that we discriminate, yes, that awful word, we discriminate against Commonwealth citizens and citizens from all over the world in favour of people who come from the European Union. A point that I found very difficult to get some to pick up. Jared, where are you from originally?
I'm South African, Nigel.
You're South African, yeah.
I do remember you saying this during the Brexit period. You're saying enter the United Kingdom on a point system, depending on your skill, which is something that I agree with. Australia use it and a few other countries, I'm not sure who. But I think that is the best route to follow. But with this deal that has just been made for being in the country for 5 years, you are now entitled. Also, another thing is we can't bring our families into this country.
I know, whereas EU citizens can now, can't they?
Yeah, I just don't think we haven't looked at all parts of this scenario.
So, Jared, to sort of sum up the unfairness, the imbalance that existed before the announcement of today's paper is still very much in place, isn't it?
I believe so, definitely.
Yeah, Jared, thank you very much indeed for your call. Nigel, too much too soon. Talk about giving this country away. Over generous and soft, says John on Twitter. She is being too generous. Once again, the door is open to get more and more people, and the cut-off date should have been the date Article 50 was triggered at the latest. Well, this is the point I keep making. There is no cut-off date in this at all. I think actually there needs to be at some point in time. Nigel Farage, I don't want my cake and eat it. I just want to get out and get control of our country back from the EU. Fine. I'm going to ask Ian in Clapton. Ian, is this the right deal or the wrong deal? So far, Ian, most callers think that it's too generous to EU citizens and doesn't redress the balance at all for people coming from the rest of the world.
Afternoon, Nigel. I think there's, as ever, just a lot of kind of misinformation and kind of distortion of things going on. I mean, I phoned up because earlier on...
Ian, put us straight, mate. Put us straight.
I would love to, Nigel. Earlier on, you had Joe from Maidstone phoning in, and Joe was outraged that his Thai bride couldn't become a citizen of the UK, and he felt that EU citizens who came over here and stayed here for 5 years and then could bring their families over were actually at an advantage over him. This doesn't make sense, because if they came over and tried to bring their own wife from Thailand over, which is what he's doing, they're not going to be able to bring her in. So it's actually dishonest of him to say they've got an advantage, and it's dishonest of you to agree with him saying it, because logically it's not the same.
Well, what he was arguing, Ian, was that if he was to go on benefits, you know, I mean, her chances of getting indefinite leave to remain would diminish quite significantly. That was the point he was making.
Nigel, that wasn't the point he was making at all. The point he was making very specifically was that he had big issues with his wife, who was from Thailand, and that someone from the EU could bring over a family member from the EU, and that was the same. That is not the same.
Well, why should EU citizens have that advantage over somebody from any other part of the world?
Well, they don't actually have that advantage over someone from any other part of the world. Obviously, there's different rules regarding all sorts of different places. Obviously,
no, there are, but
Australia has a different experience to someone from, say, Kathmandu. Now, you know, it's when we have to deal with the specifics of something. I personally believe that I think that EU migration to this country has, by and large, been beneficial. The statistics will bear me on that if we just move away from kind of shrill whistle techniques.
Well, I'm not sure they do, Ian, actually. I'm not sure they do. I mean, before 7 o'clock, Ian Payne was debating the fact that dissatisfaction with the National Health Service has reached an all-time high today. Surely, Ian, that has something to do with an exploding population, and open-door immigration to the EU is part of that problem.
I think we could just as easily argue that that's to do with a criminal lack of funding by a government that's interested in implementing privatisation through the back door, Nigel.
No, Ian, that was Labour, mate. That was Tony Blair.
I will agree with you that the PFI schemes that Blair brought in were completely culpable, but let's just face it, when Thatcher was calling him her greatest success, she wasn't far wrong. Now, fortunately, now we have a Labour Party led by someone whose policies are more in keeping with an actual left-wing agenda, who's probably not going to decimate the NHS in the same manner as a Blairite or indeed a Mayite government would do.
But Ian, do you not see the link between a problem with our public services and a population that officially last year increased by 538,000?
Nigel, when the public services are almost entirely staffed by EU immigrants, then I think that you're probably pointing the finger of blame in the wrong way. Because
why are we not training our own people? And what if 1 million come next year or 2 million come next year? Then what will you do?
What if we find a magic money tree to pay the DUP £1 billion? Who knows what will happen next year? Now, come on, we're in the world of now of what ifs. Right? Let's just talk about what is actually going on. I don't want to talk about what ifs. What if
Ian, let me ask you. Let me ask you, because we're running out of time. Let me ask you: do you think Mrs May's offer to EU citizens is the right, reasonable and fair one?
I think that Mrs May's offer to EU citizens is completely meaningless, because whatever she said is just utterly vague. It's all designed as some sort of attempt to kind of be a fop to British citizens in Europe, a fop to EU citizens here. As you say, there's no cut-off point on it whatsoever.
Yep.
Personally, I think that, we haven't even got into the nitty-gritty of this deal yet.
But in principle,
agreed. It's all smoke and mirrors at this stage. It's dancing around.
Ian, I'm going to have to leave you, mate. I'm going to have to leave you. Time has gone. Ian and Clapton, sceptical about Mrs May and many other things. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It's 7:30 and time for the news with Tim Humphrey.
The DUP says its deal to prop up Theresa May's minority government is good for Northern Ireland and the UK. The Conservatives have promised £1 billion of extra investment in Northern Ireland over the next 2 years in return for the party's support. Theresa May has set out plans for EU citizens' rights in the UK after Brexit, promising settled status for those who've been here for 5 years or more. The EU's Brexit negotiator has tweeted saying more ambition, clarity and guarantees are needed. The number of high rises to fail fire safety tests has risen to 75 across 26 local authorities in England. Councils have been urged to speed up the checks after the Grenfell fire in West London. LBC weather dry and clear for most of the night in the south, but there will be rain further north, a low of 12 degrees, cloudy just about everywhere with some rain tomorrow and a high of 21.
This is LBC.
We've all been interrupted by them, and it often feels like stopping them is practically impossible. All this week, LBC continues to carry out a special report about nuisance phone calls. We'll look at everything from why you get them to how they get your number. With new Sky Talk Shield, Sky's personalised call screening service for your landline that lets you answer the calls you want and block the ones you don't. Find out more at lbc.co.uk.
When you hear a PPI commercial like this, you think, I wonder if I ever did have PPI, and maybe I should claim with the deadline being announced. And then you think, oh, but I'm not sure where my paperwork is. So you end up doing nothing. Well, here's the easiest thing in the world to do. Just text the word EASY to 60777 and the claims guys will conduct a free search to discover if you ever had PPI. And then you can decide to pursue the claim yourself or get the claims guys to do it for you. Text EASY to 60777 now.
The claims guys.
Moving office, it can be one of the most stressful, costly, disruptive experiences of your business life. But not with Morris Interiors, who've been designing, fitting out and transforming workplaces for over 3 decades. To get your free guidebook, attend a free seminar or book a free consultation, go to officerelocation.co.uk. Morris, workplace design experts.
With breakdown cover from the AA, we'll do whatever it takes to make sure your big wheels keep on turning. Our mechanics usually get you going again in 30 minutes. Breakdown cover from the AA, because anything can happen.
Work doesn't end because you're not there. It's always 9 a.m. somewhere. There's always a call to take. And business doesn't sleep even when you do. eReceptionist lets you step outside the office and balance work with life. With eReceptionist, calls can be directed to a landline or your mobile. So wherever you are, you're local. And with our unique app, you can dial out from your landline number with your mobile. Take a free 30-day trial at ereceptionist.co.uk. Cancel within 30 days to avoid charges.
The Nigel Farage Show on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Well, we're debating Theresa May's really quite generous offer to EU citizens already in the United Kingdom, unless, of course, they're crooks, and then we're going to get rid of them and empty our jails and send them back, which is the really tough bit of it. But also today, significant, I think, that Donald Trump has actually had a victory today. And I say that because ever since he was elected, ever since he was inaugurated, we've seen judges in various states around the USA. We've even seen members of his own party in Congress, obstacles being put in the way of stopping Trump getting his manifesto put into place. It's something that I know has frustrated him hugely, and those of us that have tried to support this president have also felt very frustrated by it. Well, today, the Supreme Court have ruled allowing his travel ban to be partly reinstated. Trump himself called it a victory for our national security. So what it means is there's going to be a 90-day ban on people from 6 Middle Eastern countries and a 120-day ban on refugees whilst they review whether they've got the policy absolutely right. Trump said, as president, I cannot allow people into our country who wish to do us harm. The Supreme Court ruling says, in practical terms, this means that the executive order will not be enforced against foreign nationals from those countries who have a credible claim of a bona fide relationship with a person or entity in the states, but all other foreign nationals are subject to these provisions. This will all be up again for full review in October, by which time, he may have decided actually they've got the rules right, or they haven't got the rules right. And his son, Donald Trump Jr., tweeted, by the way, it was 9-0 at the Supreme Court with no dissents, icing on the cake. And I wonder, are we going to get the usual screams and storm of protest about what Trump has done, or have a series of unfortunate attacks in much of Europe and in the United Kingdom made people think perhaps being cautious about who you bring into your country is the right thing to do? I'm not going to attempt to debate that this evening, but I suggest we will debate that over the course of the coming few days and weeks, because it is a big issue and it's a big victory for Trump. But back to Theresa May, back to her plans that if you've been here for 5 years from the European Union, you're entitled to the same rights as everybody else, and anyone else that comes within the last 5 years or even on from now until we get a cut-off will be able to qualify for full rights. I'm going to ask Monpi in Toaster. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you.
You're very sweet. You're very sweet. So has she got this right, Monpi?
I think the first thing you have to answer is whether it's generous or not, and yes, it is a generous offer. Mm-hmm. But I think we also need to debate is that whether it's necessary or not. And if we do want to get a good deal from the European Union, so that's outside the customs union, outside the jurisdiction of the ECJ,
yep.
But to have the best access to their market in terms of tariffs, I think that we need to give away a few things like that in order to get the best possible deal from our perspective.
Yeah, no, listen, I understand that completely, and I did say at the start of the show that I understood why, for diplomatic reasons, it might have been worded the way that it was. But surely there has to be a cut-off date somewhere, doesn't there?
Yeah, I do understand that cut-off date, but don't recent figures show that immigration to the UK from the EU since the referendum vote has decreased? and not increase.
Yes, but it's still massive. Yes, but it's still massive. I mean, this is the point, isn't it? Oh, hey, wow. Listen, guys, what a victory. Net migration to the United Kingdom last year from EU and non-EU is only 250,000. It's only 10 times what it was for the 60 years after World War II. Yeah, OK, it wasn't 336,000, but it was still 250,000. So, yeah, I do understand what you're saying, that we have seen a slowing of the numbers coming, but we do still have an open door, don't we?
Yeah, and I am a staunch Brexiteer. I did really want it to happen, and I'm very happy it has.
Yep.
But I think in the long term, after we have left the European Union, I'd be happy that we have given away those 5 years in order to get the best possible access.
Yes.
In terms of economics and outside the jurisdictions of the ECJ.
So your view is that pragmatically, Theresa May, David Davis, the others, they've got this right because being generous like this will perhaps give us better chance of a tariff-free deal, yeah?
Well, whether they got it right, we won't know until the final deal is agreed, but the point I was trying to make, that it's a good step in the direction.
No, listen, you make the point beautifully. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Well, it's a reasonable point, isn't it? That you know, what is our main negotiating priority? And if indeed it is, and I'm speaking now for the government, not for me, but if it is gaining tariff-free access to the European single market, then I guess concessions have to be given, and that's the point that Mumpy was making. Evening, Nigel. Mrs May has got this right on the money. Kick out the crooks and the criminals, but everyone else should stay with us and enjoy our Brexit Britain, says Tom. Tom, that's fine, but do we have a cut-off at some point? If so, when is it? We have been far too generous, says Julie. I never voted Leave for this. We are a laughingstock, and it can only happen here. Craig thinks that Mrs May has played her cards right on this element of Brexit. Most of our politicians seem more concerned about EU nationals over here than British citizens abroad. And Debbie says they've been given everything but the kitchen sink. But that's still not enough for them. Or the loony Labour lot. Or the Scottish Nutty Party. That's a bit strong, Debbie. Martin in Chingford, is this a fair and reasonable deal? And if it's part of this bigger strategy of nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, is it a reasonable thing to have done?
Absolutely not. I voted to leave, and migration was a massive issue, right up there on my list, along with sovereignty, and I feel sold out. I really do.
Do you?
5 years is nowhere near long enough. Absolutely not. No. Anybody coming here, even to visit, we need to implement a very strict visa system. If a visitor comes in, then if they've got a criminal record, just like the States, you ain't coming in. You need insurance, so you're not prompting off of our health system as well, so we can deal with that. And if you're coming here to work, brilliant, because we do need people for the agricultural industry, fruit picking, the construction industry, but they have to be sponsored by their employer. And when that work ceases, there's no benefits for any of these people.
That's the big.
At least 10 years.
I mean, Martin, that's the big difference, isn't it? There is a big difference between a work permit, the ability to come to work, and, as is being set out very clearly here with the government, settled status within the United Kingdom. They are two very, very different things, and I have to say that I rather, think that rights of residency and rights to work have been confused and effectively become the same thing over the course of the last few years. So, Martin, what would you have done? What would your rules be? Would you say, I mean, an EU citizen who's been here for over 5 years and has obeyed the law and paid their taxes, what would you say to them?
I would say that 5 years isn't long enough. You need to be here longer, and you are still subject to the new visa system that we're going to be introducing.
Okay,
and they're going to be subject to it. Obviously, look, if you've had someone, if you have a fella or a lady that has now married a UK citizen and they've got kids, well, okay, you leave them alone, okay, and I think that's fair. However, I'm afraid, I mean, there are people here. 5 years isn't long enough. I'm sorry.
Right. No, Martin, you're perfectly clear. You think this is soft, and frankly, you feel sold out, don't you, Martin?
I do. I damn well do. Yeah, I do massively.
No,
I think that because of Corbyn's been been there open arms, saying we should have an open door policy and continue. I think the Tories have softened up, and they don't want to be looking too soft. I don't want to be too harsh now in the face of court.
Wow. And also, Martin, don't forget their track record is abysmal. Tens of thousands in the 2010 manifesto, tens of thousands in the 2015 manifesto, and once again in the 2017 manifesto, tens of thousands. I'm not sure they mean it. Martin, thank you for your call. Martin, utterly hacked off, feeling sold down the river. I suspect he's not alone in this. Going to ask Sylvie in Uxbridge. Sylvie, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
Good evening. Now, you're from Romania, I understand.
Yes, I am, yeah.
OK, so you're probably very happy with what Mrs May has said today.
Not very happy, but I'll put it this way, Nigel. Put yourself in my shoes, right?
Yep.
I left my country when I was 24 after I finished my uni.
Yep.
My country gave me an education, right?
Mm-hmm.
I came here, I've started working, I've been paying taxes for the last 5 years. I made a career for myself in here. I'm paying around £400 every week in national insurance and taxes, right? And all of a sudden, people like you come and say, all right, you should go, right?
No, whoa down there. Whoa, 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 whoa. When have I ever said that?
Well,
No, come on.
You're not pleased with what Theresa May said. That's my point here.
Well, what I'm saying is this. I'm saying two things. Firstly, we have people like you that come here, work hard and pay taxes and obey the law. Great. Equally, there are too many people that have come to the United Kingdom and paid too little tax and perhaps in some cases not obeyed the law. Not great. And I think overall, Sylvia, if I can make the point, we've allowed too many people in. What I'm arguing about Mrs May's deal, and I've argued from the start we should be generous about people like you who came here, in good faith, leaving behind your country. I get all of that. I understand that. And, you need to be a banana republic to turn your back on that. What I am arguing is there needs to be a cut-off date at some point, after which you don't have the automatic right to be able to have settled status in this country. Is that unreasonable?
No, it's not unreasonable, but I don't want to jump through hoops now just to be able to stay here.
No. How long have you been here?
Just over 5 years now.
Well, you qualify. You've got nothing to moan about at all. Hey, you're in a great position. You're in a great position.
I'm in a great position.
Yeah.
Fair enough, Nigel, but I brought my missus here. She's been here for 2 years now, right?
Yep.
She's not qualified.
Right. Well, actually, if you're married to her, she is. And anyway, if she's been here for 2 years, after 3 more years of being here, she will qualify for settled status too. And Sylvia, to reiterate this point, I've never argued for getting rid of any of you unless you've broken the law. But I thank you very much for your call, and I hope you feel reassured by today. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:46.
Coming up at 8 on LBC, Clive Bull.
So Theresa May seals a deal with the DUP with an extra £1 billion going to Northern Ireland. Are you happy for your money to be spent in this way?
Clive Bull on LBC.
I've broken down, Churchy. Cars like me belong in the fast lane, not the hard shoulder.
Oh, yes.
Oh, now I'm really going to blow a gasket.
No.
Don't end up stranded when you break down. Churchill offers new motor customers free breakdown cover.
Oh, Churchy, my knight in furry armour.
Oh.
Churchill, depend on the dog. First year free breakdown service provided by Green Flag, roadside only, new business policies only, excludes NI, underwritten by UK Insurance Limited, terms and conditions apply.
We asked people to put a price on their hearing. One reply said £100 trillion because I love music and languages. Another said, priceless. Who wouldn't want to hear their grandchildren laughing? We know how much you value your hearing. That's why at Boots we have interest-free monthly payment plans available to make the right hearing solution for you even more affordable. Boots, let's feel good. Subject to status, over 18s only. Terms and conditions apply.
Pet
Pets, we positively love them. So for those times they're feeling rough, get pet insurance from Pets in a Pickle. Go to petsinnapickle.co.uk.
She was very much a big part of my wedding. Being my mother of the bride, you would never really see the full glow of her face.
I'm Dr. Michael Zibbets, Senior Clinician at TDC Smile in a Day. In just one day, we gave Stephanie's mother a full set of implants and beautiful fixed teeth. Around 3 months later, we exchanged her first fixed teeth for a final permanent set, in time for the big day.
I mean, the photos themselves speak a million words.
Book your free consultation today. Visit smileinaday.co.uk.
I've always paid into my pension, but never thought about how it was performing or how much I was being charged for it. That's why I contacted the specialists at PensionWorks. They carried out a pension health check, which found hidden costs and expensive fees within my pension that could have cost me years of lost retirement income, meaning more money for my future.
Let the PensionWorks check your private pension for free before it's too late. Text YES to 83222. That's YES to 83222.
I used to work in a call centre. Every weekend, instead of being with my man, lost in conversation, I was with customers who'd lost their internet connection. But now I drive with Uber, so I only work weekends when I feel like it.
Oh, the football's on this weekend.
Like this weekend.
Work or not, at the touch of a button. Find out more at uber.com/driveuk. Uber, where to?
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mrs May lays out her terms for what she wants to be the deal for EU citizens living in the UK and hopes for reciprocation from our friends and colleagues still in the European Union. Some of you think this is good. Some of you think it's clever. You see it as part of a big negotiation, a package that allows us to get the right trade deal as well. Others see it as fair. Others think she's given far too much away and she's way too generous. I disagree with Theresa May. They should be entitled to nothing. British people should come first who were born here. Well, that's what Katie seems to think. And another one, Chris says, the more people you let in, the more you've got to let in for all the extra services, etc. It's a never-ending dog chasing its own tail. I worked in France in a job a French person couldn't do, paid my taxes in France, plus NI in the UK, and I didn't expect or demand anything, says Beth. Well, that's fair enough, Beth. How many times can Mrs May get things so wrong before she's forced to resign? What a mess. No, 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 Nathan, you're wrong. The Conservative Party are solid and united behind their great leader, who's today cut a deal with the DUP, and I guess looks a little bit safer than she did a couple of weeks ago. Mark, in Great Yarmouth, has Mrs May got this right, or has she been too generous?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I just want to say I don't think it's good. I don't think it's clever. I just think it's the right thing, Nigel.
OK.
Now,
is that in terms of the big package that we've got to put together here?
Yeah. Hold on. Let me finish, mate.
Yeah.
You've got to understand that these are people and they want to know where they stand. And they're a part of our country. They've come in, and the vast majority of them have worked hard. I knew Portuguese people, I knew Spanish people, I knew quite a lot of people from the European Union. Every day, Nigel, they worked. Okay, now, for all of a sudden, because this country had a vote, was to say that they have to go, or they weren't sure, I don't think that's right. And we have to be seen to be doing right, Nigel, because
No, Mark, I agree with that. I agree with that. I agree with that. And no one's ever said... I've never heard anybody in the Leave campaign say that people who came here legally, which they did, should go. But it is about restricting the numbers in the future.
But Nigel, why you don't need to antagonise. And the thing is that you've got to have a bit of decorum. You've got to show a bit of compassion. And the fact is that the way I look at it is that I want to live in a country. I voted for Brexit, by the way, because I felt it was the right thing for my country. Okay, and I wanted parliamentary sovereignty.
Yep.
But it needs to go through Parliament to be rubber stamped. because it then shows, others. It shows those who are already living here that we mean business. We are not going to we're not going to play games with your lives. And I really am upset because I didn't vote for Brexit to upset people. I voted for Brexit because I wanted, again, to be Parliament to be sovereign. Now, what we do after that is another argument.
But Mark, you think what she's done? You think what she's done today is the reasonable, sensible, moral thing to have done? Yeah,
I do.
Fine.
Yeah.
No, Mark, thank you, and you've made that point with, some passion. A Leave voter, Mark, who feels very strongly that being generous and being decent is part of what we are and who we are. A point made well. Paul, in Swiss Cottage, is this the right deal? Is it generous? Is it too generous?
With respect, Nigel, I didn't actually ring up to talk about this deal that Theresa May's done. I think everything she's done is farcical.
Right.
What I'd like to say is you had a Romanian guy on about 5 minutes ago.
Yes.
And you were saying that you were intimating that you fully respect how law-abiding sort of EU citizens come over here and work. We all know that without these European citizens coming over and work, the country's going to fall apart. I work in construction.
How do we manage before, Paul? How do we manage before? I mean, I heard this argument from the fruit industry.
Please let me finish.
How do we manage?
It's not. I think times were different back then.
What in 2006? In 2006, I mean, don't forget, Paul. Romania and Bulgaria gained access in 2007. I'm now being told, Paul, by the fruit industry, particularly in Kent and elsewhere, that without an open door to Romania and Bulgaria, the fruit would rot in the fields. Is that really credible?
I believe personally, having worked in several industries, that we are so reliant on EU and foreign labour that the concept of not having them in the United Kingdom will make this place a third world country. Look at the health service. Look at the fact that 96 or whatever it is % of nurses do not want to work in this country anymore. And I hate to say this, but this is from your rhetoric that you've brought about. I'm not saying that your views are your own views only. There are lots of people in this country that think the same, but I think you're all being really short-sighted. I'm not saying that we don't need to have some kind of change and limitations in terms of who comes into the country.
So what are we arguing about, Paul? So what are we arguing about?
Well, what you
I mean, all I've ever said is let's have controls.
What you're arguing about, huh? Of course we've got to have some controls. But what I was going to ask you is, when you spoke to that Romanian guy on the radio, you said to him that we can send away these, vast amount of criminals. I'm going to ask you a question. Of all the Romanians and EU citizens in this country right now, what percentage of those people do you consider represent a criminal, people with a criminal record or people that are actually pouncing off the state? Because in my experience in the building trade in particular, we are absolutely as dependent on EU citizens coming in and working as we are on the raw materials that we use to do the job.
Well, Paul, listen, there is no problem with EU citizens coming to work in this country, or citizens from India or New Zealand or America or wherever it may be, right? No problem at all. But we don't want people with criminal records, and if people come without criminal records and break the law, we don't want them here. Paul, the odd thing about this conversation is we're not a million miles apart. If we need good foreign labour from good people, let's have it. Let's do it on a work permit system. And what's not to like about that?
Well, whether or not that's workable, I don't know. I mean, they're so ingrained in our society. I mean, we're all foreigners here. Even the name Farage to me indicates that you're, in fact, possibly French.
Well, you may well be right. But you may well be right. And they were a huge influx at the time. But Paul, look, we're not that far apart. And I made the point to Sylvie, the Romanian who rang up, that there is no enmity towards people like him, but there is an absolute desire to get back control of our own borders. And, Paul, we have to do something about this exploding population. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how many foreign nurses we have. The health service won't be able to cope. Paul, I thank you very much indeed for that call. Well, a pretty lively debate on this issue tonight, as I thought it was going to be. And my final thought on all of this is right from the start, I've thought that this was the one big, generous offer that Theresa May and the UK government should make. You know, anybody that has come to the United Kingdom legally should be, entitled to stay, and if they've paid their way for a period of 5 years, and incidentally, that was UKIP manifesto stuff in 2 general elections, then that seems reasonable to me. They should be entitled to benefits, having paid their taxes and obeyed the law. So I think that's absolutely right. We make this offer. It's disappointing that the EU have already rather talked it down because they want to have a foreign court, the European Court of Justice, having jurisdiction here, which it can't. But we have to have a cut-off date. Otherwise, this is simply going to go on forever. So, the principles of what she's done today are right, but again, frankly, not quite tough enough, not quite brave enough, in my view. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow at 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Thank you very much, Nigel, and lots to talk about between now and 10. At 9, it's the Consumer Hour. I'm joined by Dean Dunham, consumer lawyer and the Retail Ombudsman, here to answer your questions about your consumer rights. So if you've had a problem with a retailer or a contract, or you think you've been scammed, then listen to the Consumer Hour at 9. We will be coming back as well to this issue of the Prime Minister setting out her plan for EU citizens. But first of all, another deal from Theresa May, that with the DUP, with an extra £1 billion going to Northern Ireland. Are you happy for your money to be spent in this way? 0345 6060 973 is the number here at LBC.
On FM, online, on your mobile and on digital radio.